And what a splendid contemplation, too, when one, who has traveled these realms and can duly appreciate them, imagines them as they might in a future be seen by some great protecting policy of government, preserved in their pristine beauty and wilderness in a magnificent park, where the world could see for ages to come. What a beautiful and thrilling specimen for America to preserve and hold up to the view of her refined citizens in the world in future ages! A nation's park, containing man and beast in all the wild and freshness of their nature's beauty. George Catlin, 1842. When George Catlin said this, he was not imagining the creation of national parks in the already populated East Coast, but rather in the new and untainted expanse of the West. In spite of this, a series of felt rights and responsibilities in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina prompted the creation of the first national park in the South east of the Mississippi River. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park was created to protect the land and history of the area through the responsibility felt by American people. However, the creation of this park denied the rights of people living in the area through the opposed confiscation of their land and homes, generating the question of whether responsibilities can or cannot revoke rights. The first national park created after George Catlin's dream to preserve the land was Yellowstone National Park, created by Congress in 1872. The United States continued to take the responsibility to set aside land in unclaimed territories with the creation of 6 other national parks. There was considerable growth under President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1916, the idea of conservation had grown so much that President Woodrow Wilson signed the National Park Service Organic Act to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. With this, the National Park Service was created under the Department of the Interior. The government now had both the right and responsibility to promote areas for national parks. Lafayette National Park was the only national park east of the Mississippi and was in Maine, making it a long trip for many in the East. Parks to preserve the wildlife of the East and be more accessible to those living on that side of the United States were needed, but land available was running out. Acknowledging the possibility of a national park in the East, which would preserve the natural state, bring tourism and an economic boost to the area, and be a lasting legacy, the Southern Appalachian National Park Committee was created in 1924 to decide where parks could exist. One requirement was that the land would need to be donated. An area in the Smoky Mountains was considered to have some of the oldest mountains on the earth, and with the diverse wildlife and unique habitat of the mountains rolling with smoke like fog, the Smoky Mountain region was proposed. The commission chose the area, and in 1926, Calvin Coolidge signed the bill that established the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, setting into action the need for at least 150,000 acres of land purchased and given to the government. Now the issue was getting the rights to the land by first raising enough money and dealing with the logging companies that own much of the land. There was a responsibility, not only felt by the Park Commission, but also the people in the area, to protect the land that already in other areas was becoming more and more like the cities of the East.
Park promoters there in the 20s wanted to move toward having a park because 17 logging operations was defacing it. They was cutting and timbering, leaving a lot of hillsides void of what was needing to be preserved. And that was the real reason for trying to obtain the land for a national park. The government was not interested in it because it was being logged and they did not have money, so they told Tennessee and North Carolina, if you wanted a park, you buy it. Give it to us. So this is the only park that was given to the nation from the people.
The park was established June 15th, 1934, and it was an amazing achievement because 85% of the land was owned by lumber companies, and they fought in court. They did everything in the world they could to prevent it from being a national park.
In order to conquer the logging companies and buy the land from the people who had called this land their home for generations, an estimated $10 million was going to be needed.
They took pledges from citizens. I happened to see a page from a ledger, and I saw 3 people that I knew that were on the ledger, and one gave a nickel, one gave a dime, and one gave $1. The one that gave $1 was a teacher at the high school when I went there. And make a long story short, the citizens raised $5 million. It was going to take 10 to give the whole thing, and John D. Rockefeller gave the whole 10 million.
The creation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was a responsibility felt by many in the area, but there were also people that would end up losing the rights to live in the land. Their ancestors spent sweat and tears making the homes they live in, so having it being taken from them seemed unthinkable. With the United States starting to struggle in the Great Depression, this was especially not the time people wanted to lose their homes. Hardly having any say in what you are paid also made this worse.
The government came in and gave them, at the time, supposedly fair market value for the property, and they had to move out. And the sad part is that it was, before the Great Depression. So the government came in and gave them a pittance for the land, and most of the people obviously didn't want to move because, that's where they were born, raised, etc. And they absolutely loved the area.
Some felt they got ample compensation. Others didn't feel like they got ample compensation at all. But they had to accept what the government gave them and leave. Some people that left turned around and invested into another place after they got out, wherever they were going, and did okay. Others put their money back in the bank, and the Depression took it. So a lot of these people died as paupers, or just struggling to get back and get some semblance of life going for them.
Having to lose home, neighbors, and money all within close happening of each other was a toll that made the Great Depression harder on most of these mountain people. When they realized they had a responsibility to protect the land, not all of them thought that their rights to home and birthplace would be given up as well.
No one wanted to leave, and most of them were told, and they thought when it came down to it, they wouldn't have to sell if they didn't want to. But they did have to. If they didn't sell and they fought it, as John Oliver did, he fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they still took his land, paid him for it, but they took it. So it wasn't by choice. Nobody wanted to sell.
Now, John W. Oliver, of course, was the grandson of John and Lorraine Fraser Oliver, the first white permit seller. Now, he is the one that fought for the people of Cades Cove, for them to stay as long as they needed, to keep the buildings intact, because a lot of them, as soon as they would move out, the park, was ordered to tear down and level the houses. At one point, there were 250 homes in Cades Cove.
The park has been a good thing, but the sacrifice of those who had to leave, that is where I don't think a lot of people give credit. The sacrifice was the families that had to give the land up. They left, many of them left homesick.
The Great Smoky Mountains National Park was created with the responsibility of preserving land and history in mind. Through this park, people throughout the United States have a right to visit the beautiful land. What is important to remember, however, are the rights that people gave up in order for this to happen. The park could not be here today without the sacrifices of many families that gave up their rights to live in the land. Some even took the responsibility they felt for the area by not only giving up their land, but also raising money to buy the land from others. Today, the former residents of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and their descendants can return to see some of their homes and the land that had been in their families preserved to pass down for generations. With the movement of families, however, many lost friends that their families had since the first settlers moved into the mountains. When one thinks of responsibility, preservation of rights might come to mind. What is not always realized is that with responsibility often comes the sacrifice of rights.
How can I keep from crying when I never expect to be here anymore?